Okay, welcome to our final Research Hive seminar of the season. I'm really pleased to be able to present a seminar to you on this subject, on this topic, which I think is relevant to all researchers at any part of their career and across all subject areas, which is quite unusual, and however you might publish. I'm not going to say an awful lot more because I don't want to stray into what our speakers are going to say. Just to let you know that there'll be plenty of time at the end for questions, no matter how big, no matter how small. There's a couple of laptops I think dotted around because certainly as Josh talks, you might want to get yourself an ORCiD ID. I know I always start fiddling as soon as somebody starts talking about a particular piece of software or something that might be on the web. But there's some members of the research support team, the library research support team, who are around and in that room and will be able to help you if you've got any questions about getting an ORCiD ID. Okay, so let me introduce the two speakers of this today. They're both, I think, friends of the library for very different reasons. Professor Jackie Cassell holds the chair of primary care epidemiology in BSMS here at Sussex. She's been a great supporter of the library and I think has chaired a Hive seminar at some point, been involved in a Hive seminar at some point a few years ago. Certainly one of the areas of your research that I find really interesting is the work that you're doing on patient records and the use of full text and how that supports public health for the public health benefit. And Josh Brown, who we haven't seen for a number of years here at Sussex, who started his career here in the library, I think, not quite as a shelfer, but certainly certainly supporting the REF submission in 2008. He left here to say conquer the world and now finds himself as the regional director of ORCiD in Europe. So we're going to start with Josh. That's all right.
So, good afternoon everyone. My name's Josh Brown and I'm ORCiD's Regional Director for Europe. I'll talk a little bit today about what ORCiD is, why it exists, what we're doing around the world, and some of the places that you'll start to see ORCiD identifiers more and more in your day-to-day work as you intersect with different systems, different processes, whether it's publication, research data or others. So that's an ORCiD ID, that's mine, along there. It's a 16-digit number, and there's a very good reason that we've started producing these, and it's very simple. Names are a disaster. When it comes to identifying any one of the millions of researchers publishing around the world in the tens of thousands of scientific journals, it's incredibly difficult. And if you think that in some publications I would put my name as Josh Brown, in others I might put Joshua Brown, in others I might be J Brown or J.A. Brown, and if you add in different organisational affiliations as you move through your career, different professional titles, it very rapidly becomes impossible to recognise someone just from their name. Oh, that seems to be... No, I don't think I will change. Shall I change the colour scheme?
No.
So, can names be cleared up? Well, yes. The idea is that you use a digital name. It's the same and it sits in the background however you choose to express your conventional language name, the human readable version of your name. And we use persistent identifiers for that. That's what that 16-digit number is. It's a persistent identifier. It's yours. It goes with you everywhere you go. It's the same in different systems, so you only ever need one. And the idea is that it specifies the person. There are other identifiers that we use with, so organisation identifiers, or you may be familiar with DOIs for journal articles, or ISBNs for books. They are also persistent identifiers, specific to one resource. Now, as I said, there are lots and lots of useful identifiers. As I said, DOIs, also available for research data via DataCite. ISNI is very familiar to the library field, the International Standard Name Identifier. Ones that you'll probably be seeing more and more of are things like the GRID identifier, which identify organisations who have received research funding. Ringgold for organisations, and you may be familiar with the Scopus. Author ID or the Researcher ID, both of which are systems that ORCiD interacts with to try and connect all of these different sources of information about your publications together. So we provide these persistent identifiers, and they help to distinguish names all around the world. In lots and lots of countries, there are very limited pools of family names, and it makes identifying researchers extremely difficult. We've just passed 2 million live IDs. We issued our 2 millionth ID a couple of weeks ago. We have more than 400 members around the world. And you can see here, well, you probably can't actually, but this big blue pie here is research institutions, are 68% of our members. And the big darker blue slice here, 58% of our members are in Europe. So this is in no small part to initiatives like the JISC National ORCiD Consortium for the UK, which brought us in something like 60 universities in the space of 3 months, joined ORCiD and started to integrate. So Europe is definitely our fastest growing area of integrations and systems and out-systems integration, and it's also the area where we're engaging most with universities. So you'll be seeing lots of us around the place. The important thing about ORCiD is we're platform neutral. We work with any system, so we can work with Elsevier's Scopus, we can work with Thomson Reuters' Web of Science, and any other system you care to mention. We're non-proprietary. We use it's all open source, open data. All our APIs, documentation, software are available. We're independent. We're not beholden to any one large corporate entity for our existence. Our whole setup is designed so that our board of directors has to be majority non-commercial, and okay, thank you. Yeah, it does. ORCiD, yes. And as I said, as you may have seen from that chart that showed our integrations around the world, we are absolutely international. We are integrated in 40 plus countries at the moment, and the number keeps on growing. And importantly, we're supported by member fees. So a university who wishes to add information to the records of their researchers, for instance, joins as a member and they pay a fee. The researcher never pays. So it's always free to have an ID, and it means that if your university is not a member and you're asked for an ORCiD ID in another system, you can get one at no cost. It takes a few seconds of your time. That's it. And that's it. You only need to do two things: register for an ID and use it. So when you're prompted to use it, just sign into your ORCiD account and add your ID to whatever it is that you're doing. I'll show you some of the benefits that come from that, but the key thing is it takes about 30 seconds to register for an ID. I was at a seminar in Rome, and I was sitting behind an Italian researcher, and he registered I looked over his shoulder while he did it. He registered for an ID, he logged into the Scopus author ID account, connected his ORCiD ID to 40 years of publications, removed 5 publications that were from before he finished his PhD that weren't his but were assigned to the same name, sent that correction to the Scopus team, who then corrected all of his citation records, removing those false citations from his professional history, and that whole process took about 2.5 minutes. So it's not complicated, it really is very simple. And he immediately cleaned up his citation record in Scopus, just like that, using this ID. So there are immediate advantages. The other thing is the fact that we're encouraging researchers to engage in this way with the research information about them. It is changing the way that people, especially research administrators, funders, and other people who gather in a lot of research information, actually see the role of the researcher in this. It's much more of an active role for researchers. There's a lot of questions we're opening up about who owns the data, because historically a lot of the data about research, about citations, other things has been privately owned by corporations who sell it back to universities. Well, the researcher owns their own data. They control their own ORCiD record. That's very important to us. In terms of privacy, it means you can see everything that's connected to your ORCiD record. You can switch connections on, switch them off. Every single piece of information that you have, you can make public, or you can make private, or you can have an in-between stage, which is we call read limited, where only an organisation that you've given permission to can read that. So that's kind of almost privater, I guess. So these are really important for us, is to kind of have this out here, as this is something that researchers control. They curate the connections and the systems that use it. So the approach at universities, and there's a quote here from Wolfram Horstmann, who used to be the assistant director at Bodleian Libraries. He's gone back to Germany now. But his point here about data: make it much easier to use. Input once and reuse often. And that's one of the visions that ORCiD has, is we're involved in lots of different systems, and a computer can send an API call to the registry and pull down information from the registry, bring it into your own system here locally, and then the researcher doesn't have to type it in again. It makes life a lot simpler when it's properly integrated and properly embedded. In the UK, funders are increasingly using ORCiD IDs. National Institute for Health Research and Wellcome Trust both have ORCiD ID mandates for applications for grant funding. ORCiD UK are integrating ORCiD IDs in GES. That should be going live in May. And when they replace GES entirely, there'll be a much fuller ORCiD integration available there. So I think there's a lot of interesting developments there. And HEFKI, assuming they're still there, for Ref 2020, are trying to figure out how they're going to use ORCiD IDs for that. So there's a lot of exploration. So it's going to become, I think, more important, not less, over time. Another area here is publishers requiring ORCiD IDs. The Royal Society in January announced that from now on, all of their journals would require ORCiD IDs for the corresponding author. And other publishers, PLOS, eLife, Science, IEEE, are following suit with that. So this has become quite a big publisher initiative. We didn't really know this was going to happen until it was quite well advanced, so we were really pleased about this. But what it means is that the publishers recognise that by embedding ORCiD identifiers in the publications themselves, then you improve the accuracy of the attribution, you avoid problems down the line with the metadata that comes out of publications, and you make sure that the citation counts, attributions, co-authorship, other connections to research data sets that might underpin the article are accurate. So it gives them a valuable tool for checking that the information they're providing is correct. Another way publishers are working with ORCiD IDs is this kind of automatic update process. So when you submit the manuscript, you're asked to provide your ORCiD ID. You provide your ORCiD ID, that stays, it's embedded in the PDF, it's embedded in the information about the article, and when the publisher claims a DOI for your article when it goes live, in the information they send to Crossref, who provide those DOIs, they include your ORCiD ID. Crossref detect that ORCiD ID and they automatically send it back to the ORCiD record that's associated with it. From there, it could come back to the university library, it could come to a profile system, it could go to your funder so they could see that you have published in a given journal and can go and check its open access. So you've got mandate compliance covered there as well. So this is really exciting. In the first 3 weeks this was live, we got 30,000 notifications sent to researchers about new publications. So it's a big thing. So most, sort of somewhere around about 50% of journals use Crossref DOIs. This process also works for DataCite DOIs as well for research data. So if you submit a data set to a disciplinary data center or data repository and they use DataCite DOIs, you can get a notification that that's in your system as well. So that's also extremely helpful if your university has to answer to a funder mandate or policy about research data management, to be able to see where it's housed and what the access conditions are for that. It's extremely important. So one other aspect that you might be, I'm sure you will all be doing peer reviews, but we are starting to collect peer review information in the ORCiD registry, and it's the same process. When you submit a review, you provide your ORCiD ID, and then the publishers can send this information back. It's a pretty simple workflow. Doesn't actually involve any more work than signing in at the point where you submit the review and deciding if you want review information sent to your record or not. You do have the option to say no. For those organisations that do open peer review, they just send all that information and a link to the review. The organisations that do closed peer review, they manage that in different ways. So just as you might see on a publisher web page for a journal site, you might see the list of peer reviewers, but they're not linked to anything. It's just these people reviewed for us. They do something similar with something like an annual update, just so you can't actually be tied to a specific publication and break blind peer review. What we're seeing is, as a result of these workflows, the number of pieces of information with ORCiD IDs embedded is growing, is stratospheric. We've got 5 million records in Web of Science associated with an ORCiD ID, 2 million articles, it's actually 2.5 million articles now in Europe PubMed Central with ORCiD IDs associated. And you can actually search for those using the ORCiD ID now, which is brilliant. And Elsevier Connect have around 3 million records with links to ORCiDs. So this uptake in the big systems that house a lot of bibliometric data is really, really growing. So these are things here. There are other options, so you can connect an ORCiD ID to a PhD thesis in ethos. There was a JISC-funded project to connect that to research data as well. So for an early career researcher, being able to have a portable, permanent record of both their thesis and the data and the work that went into that is very important. It's also validated by the institution that gave you your PhD. So it's not just sort of a self-asserted claim or something. It's actually out there, validated and associated to a trusted source. So the aim is that we connect different systems, different profiles. There's a memorable example where there was one researcher said was managing 11 different profiles or identifier systems, and he had them all listed in his email signature, which was, better than one of those weird legal disclaimers that says you don't have any right to read this or don't print it. It was just this huge list of digital profiles and IDs. And at ORCiD, we just connect the links to those. You can maintain information in other places. We're not a profile system. We're not a research information management system of the type they use here at Sussex. We are just a place for you to manage the connections between your works and yourself. That's it. That's what we do. So this is our vision, is this kind of connected career. So in this slide you can see there's a publication with an ORCiD ID embedded in it, in the red box, which connects to the person's ORCiD record. And here you can link to their employer, and this is where they've been claimed by their employer. So KAUST have claimed this research as theirs, so you can see that the source of information about their employment is the employer, and there it is linked to the researcher again. And here, embedded in all of this, there are multiple identifiers, because there's the ORCiD ID for the person, the DOI for the article, and the Ringgold ID for the organisation. And that's what we would send. If there was a computer-based request for this, we would just send them those 3 IDs, rather than sending all of this metadata around. All of the words in this are just so you can see what's attached to your ORCiD identifier. What's really important are the identifiers behind it that can then be sent to other systems and help them communicate more efficiently and automatically more and more. So sooner or later it's going to start raining funding information, publication information, research data information, peer review, patent information. All of this can be connected to ORCiD IDs. It doesn't all have to be in this record. Where it can be added automatically, then that's great. But the important thing is it's embedded in those other systems. So when those people come to interact with you again, they know you're the same person who submitted this patent or this article or that data set in the past. So there's a little bit of what we've done and our vision for the future. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, John.